All right, hey, I'm Clay.
I'm Ben.
Our project is on psilocybin or psilocybin, however you want to say it. And so what this is the chemical that's naturally found that produces a trip in shrooms, magic mushrooms. If you've ever heard of people taking shrooms, this is what's getting them high. Naturally occurs in over 200 species of mushrooms. And psilocybin itself doesn't actually do anything for you or to you, but it breaks down into psilocin, and that's actually what produces the trip. And psilocin is not only, so it's an agonist for serotonin receptors, so it plugs in where serotonin normally would, but it also is an SSRI, so it prevents reuptake of serotonin, so it's kind of a double whammy there, and it is listed as a Schedule I drug.
Okay, so what Clay was talking about with the breaking down into psilocybin into psilocin is the only difference between psilocybin and psilocin is this phosphate group. So as soon as it gets into your body, it dephosphorizes this group right here and becomes psilocin. You can see here how similar that psilocin and serotonin are, and that's why it's able to bond to both the postsynaptic neuron and the presynaptic neuron to block reuptake and to stimulate the receptors. It does not affect dopamine receptors like most other drugs that affect the D2 receptor. It'll affect the dopamine receptor only in like extra high doses usually. So psychological effects, like I talked about, it's a hallucinogen. So you're going to get weird, sort of dreamy, loss of touch with reality, feeling connection with the environment, that type of stuff. Also, synesthesia can be a potential side effect. So if you want to, eat some chicken and ice cream and see the color blue, you might want to take a trip on this. Just kidding, don't do that. The trips last about 3 to 6 hours. I've seen as high as like 7 or 8, but for most scholarly articles, I saw about 6 hours tops. About 70 to 80% of people reported mystical experiences. That could be like a spiritual connection or a connection with God, which we'll talk about in the religious aspect. Excuse me, religious aspects. But about 20 to 40% produced an intense fear and anxiety.
Excuse me. And I also saw where, like, of those that had a bad experience with their trip, about a third of those said it lasted for the whole thing. So it is possible. When we talk about side effects and stuff, we'll get into it.
And so lasting effects. So the people who did have a positive trip, actually a month later, 2 months later, 14 months later, they still reported as much high self-esteem and well-being as they did right after they got off the trip. And so their mood increased, their productivity, their personality changed. The physical effects, so like with any drug that you're a lot of drugs that you're intoxicated, it's lack of coordination, there's a muscle weakness, there's also nausea and vomiting, and that might not be an effect of the psilocybin or the psilocin itself, but just eating a mushroom, and a lot of mushrooms and fungi are, not good for you, and poisonous. It leads to rapid tolerance, so you take it the first time, and the second time you take it soon thereafter, you need more of it and more of it to get the same level of high.
Although that tolerance does fade over time, so if you take it once, and then you wait like a month or 2 months to take it again, you can still get the same effect after the same amount. So that tolerance builds rapidly, but it also goes away somewhat rapidly as well.
And so that tolerance is also cross-tolerant among other hallucinogens. So if you take psilocin or psilocybin, and then you take LSD, you'll have a tolerance to LSD or DMT or whatever other hallucinogens there are. But it doesn't, even though you have a tolerance to it, it doesn't lead to a physical or psychological dependence, so it's not really addictive. You can take it once, you can take it twice, and then you don't have to take it anymore. There's also low toxicity, so you're not really ever going to overdose on it. So the effective dose that I saw was about 6 milligrams, and the lethal dose in humans is projected to be 6 grams. So it's 1,000 times more than the necessary dose. So it's practically not going to kill you at all, unless you're just trying it out.
Unless because you're intoxicated, you jump out the window.
Right, we'll talk about
which. So spiritual use, this has been used, especially in Native American cultures, for thousands of years. and they often report, or talk about spiritual experience with this entheogen. Theos is Latin for God within, or for God. So entheogen is the God within. Really, these experiences are described as connecting with your inner God, with more of a pantheistic sense of God, as in everything is God, and transcendent other, sacred world, all these things that really kind of deity that you can't exactly explain, or spirituality. It's that type of spiritual experience. But even, not only that, but there's a famous study with Harvard Divinity School students where they were introduced to psilocybin, and they reported good spiritual experiences as well. And even up to like 25 years later, they were not quizzed. I can't think of the word. They asked them again, to reflect on that experience, and a good majority of them said they would list it in their top 5 most spiritual experiences ever. So I don't know, like, what kind of church they were preaching in. That's one of their best spiritual experiences, but that's what they said. And some scholars even believe that Joseph Smith, who's the founder of Mormonism, may have been tripped on shrooms when he had his revelations or encounters with Gabriel. For recreational use, there's a lot of overlap here with spiritual. So especially like with native cultures, that was really the main, or was and is the main goal there. But for like people in the majority culture, I would say take it for the trip and for the experience, even though they do report these spiritual type experiences. And it's usually administered through ingestion. Been found where some people have like crushed it up and taken it intravenously, but that's really rare. And what did you say? Like
most people either eat raw, dried, or a lot of people brew it into tea.
Yeah. And you can talk about mushroom hunters.
Yeah. So psilocybin and psilocin itself is a Schedule I drug, but the mushrooms are kind of iffy because they just kind of grow out in the wild. So the government can't enforce mushrooms growing out in the wild. So people, have these field manuals or whatever, and they'll go out and they'll look for these mushrooms and try to pick out the right mushrooms so they can get a high off of it. So it's kind of this, I don't want to say it's a community, but sort of.
Yeah, because if you just go out and grab random mushrooms in the field, like you might be grabbing lethal ones, because some mushrooms are good to eat, but most of them are not. And there's like an example of a picture of a field guide, different types of mushrooms.
So the risks, again, with any intoxicating drug, you're going to have some reckless behavior, especially when taken with other drugs like alcohol. There have been reports of people high on shrooms and alcohol jumping off of balconies and windows and killing themselves. So bad trips are another one. Anytime you have a bad trip and you have this psychological effects, and you'll get symptoms of psychosis and schizophrenia, potentially even up to the point of needing to be put in the emergency room, and they'll give you benzodiazepines and calm you down that way. And when you have those bad trips, a lot of times, even months and years after, people will report flashbacks from those traumatic experiences. And one of the biggest risks is, again, with those mushroom hunters, is picking the wrong mushrooms. Because a lot of mushrooms might look the same, but actually be different, and you pick the wrong one, end up poisoning yourself. Gastrointestinal illness, some minor stuff on that, so I guess there's some constipation or diarrhea, but usually nothing too serious.
And that's pretty much it.
What questions do y'all have for them?
Oh.
Okay.
Is there a specific species of mushroom that produces this?
There's like 200, so it's like a whole.
Okay.
Most of them are in the genus Psilocybin.
Yeah, they're like psilocybin mushrooms, but they're found in I think it's about every continent except Antarctica. So like even in Africa, North America, South America, Europe, Asia, all throughout the world.
I had just a couple of questions. You had mentioned flashbacks as one of the, or negative things. And I was wondering about the flashbacks. Is it more just like you think, or if you know the answer to this, is it more like you just recall that state of being, I don't know, freak out or something? Or do you actually re-experience the hallucinations and the, physical?
I don't think you have more hallucinations. I think it's just more intense anxiety and stuff like that.
That maybe what you saw being called your memory type thing.
Okay.
So like, not like you're actually seeing it, but like, I don't know, if you think about something that happened in your childhood, good or bad, you can kind of visualize it in your mind's eye. I think that's kind of what it was talking about.
So sort of like the negative counterpart of the was they Harvard Divinity School? Was that the people that had these big religious experiences and they think back on that and they go, oh, that was wonderful, that was the best thing ever. So that might even be a flashback, but it's kind of a good flashback.
Right.
Is that okay? Yeah.
I think there's something, I can't remember what it was, like HPDD or something, where it's like, it's still, people still have hallucinations even after they've taken it, but it's like usually with LSD, shrooms, like a lot of psychedelics, it's like people who take it often. But like I've seen, yeah, because I know there was one person that I've met that has taken like a lot of psychedelics, and it's still like, they still experience hallucinations. And like they'll see colors sometimes that aren't there, or kind of things like morph into other things, but it's like a minor hallucination compared to like the actual thing when you're experiencing the truth. And that's what I've heard.
Another question I had was, you talked about Native Americans and them using psilocybin. I don't know the answer to this, and I'll see if y'all ran across it. You know how certain Native Americans use peyote? And so it was just a button off of a cactus, I believe. Okay, so would that be different tribes use peyote, or was one tribe sometimes use both, or?
Yeah, it's going to be especially more popular in certain tribes and civilizations. Like, was it the
Aztecs?
Yeah, the Aztecs are
South
notorious for it. But it listed like several just all across the map, but especially the Aztecs were some that were especially known.
I would imagine, I don't know where the peyote grows, but I would imagine it depends on the region of like where the mushroom grows and where the peyote grows, stuff like that.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe the peyote was more common in Native Americans out in western United States, which I think are the Apaches maybe, or I'm not sure, but, okay. One other question. Did y'all encounter anything in your research about how, I mentioned this, about how they, they're using this now as a really breakthrough thing to treat PTSD? And actually,
I've seen more recent studies going in towards that direction.
And the FDA, from what I understand, I would say within the past year or so, fast-tracked this to be able to do research on it because it was showing to be, instead of having to go through so many hoops to get is it a Schedule 1? To get a Schedule 1, be able to approve for research, they see the potential and there's such a need for it that they went ahead and just kind of said, okay, go ahead and start doing research on it. I thought I'd run across something like that, but y'all not come across a lot as far as using it for treatment purposes.
I didn't run across a ton about that, but I definitely, I remember you mentioning that as well.
Yeah, okay. All right, any other questions? Really interesting presentation, guys, thank you.